Hello, thank you for joining me today as I share Savannah's enthusiasm for our rich Irish history. I'm Luciana Spraker. As Director of the City of Savannah, Georgia's Municipal Archives, I have the responsibility for preserving and providing access to the city's historical records. Through this duty, I am in a constant state of learning and discovery as researchers come in to use our records. For today's program, I thought I would provide a little intro into conducting archival research in a municipal government's collection as one traces individuals, families, and specific communities using the Irish in Savannah as a case study. Today's presentation should be of interest not only to those studying Irish history or Savannah history, but those wondering how local government records might assist them in genealogy or studying another specific community group. As a representative of the local archival community, I want to make sure everyone has a clear understanding of what I mean when I use the word archives. The Society of American Archivists provides several definitions for this word. First and foremost, archives are the materials created or received by a person, family, or organization in the conduct of their affairs, and preserved because of their enduring value. We also use the word to refer to a repository or organization that collects these records, the physical building where these collections are housed, as well as the professional discipline of administering such collections. Local governments, like archives like ours, are just one type of archives. Within the realm of government archives, you have national, state, county repositories, towns and cities. Historical societies and community archives are often tied to public libraries and are another. Corporate archives collect the records of their businesses, supporting the internal work of the corporation. Religious archives and private collections fill in many gaps. Archives are not just nice to have, they play an important role in sustaining communities. Records can help protect citizens' rights, ground communities in their past, and help plan for the future. Different types of archives will have different user groups and stakeholders, but typically most work with historians and academics, students including both K through 12 and college level, citizens and local residents, genealogists, and the parent organizations, staff, and leadership. The power of archives is found in having direct access to the primary source. Historians base their work on original research and primary resources. While we are constantly trying to increase our digitized collections to improve online and remote access and enhance the user experience, especially now in a COVID world, nothing replaces accessing records in person. The act of touching something that someone created hundreds of years ago, that provides a tangible connection to your subject that you cannot get online. Savannah has several major archival repositories. The Georgia Historical Society was specifically founded to collect and preserve Georgia history. Their collections are strong in documenting families, businesses, and organizations. Chatham County, the City of Savannah, and the Catholic Diocese of Savannah all have records management functions that have resulted in extensive archival collections. Chatham County's records include Superior Court clerk property deeds, tax assessor's records, probate court marriage licenses, wills, and estates, as well as the health department's birth and death certificates. The Catholic Diocese serves as the main repository for sacramental records like baptisms and marriages of the parishes. The main branch of the local public library maintains a local history and genealogy collection. There are many other smaller archival collections in Savannah, housed in churches, museums, businesses, and private collections. Savannah history is spread among these major repositories, as well as hidden in the smaller corporate and private collections. Gaining a true and complete understanding of any facet of Savannah history requires one to consult several institutions. The same as depending on one primary or secondary source puts you at risk of pigeonholing yourself to one side of the story. Relying on just one Savannah repository puts you at risk of missing the big picture. A good example of this is for those conducting building research in Savannah. At a minimum, researchers need to consult resources at the Chatham County Courthouse, Georgia Historical Society, Bull Street Public Library, and the City Municipal Archives. Another example demonstrating this is that at the Historical Society, Public Library, and City all have clipping files which contain an assortment of materials. We may all have a file titled something like Irish in Savannah, but due to the nature of the clipping and collecting process, each of our folders will be entirely unique. For many years, the City Municipal Archives was somewhat hidden to the public and even city staff. People didn't realize we were there, or if they did, that the records were open to them. This makes me think that that may also be the case in other communities. People are quick to think of going to do research at the national or state level, but may overlook the government records in their own backyards. Most states in the United States have public records laws protecting government records from improper handling. In Georgia, our records are protected by the Georgia Records Act and the Georgia Open Records Act. The first identifies that records governments create are public property and need to be properly managed through retention schedules that tell us what we need to keep and for how long. The second mandates that public records have to be open and accessible to the public. These two laws work together to protect both the records and our citizens. The City Archives has a primary mission to collect, manage, preserve, and make accessible records documenting our history in accordance with these laws. As we go through examples today, you can think of the City Archives as a model for other municipal archives, though we may be different from some, as we have a dedicated department and staff. A lot of local governments do not. You may find the role of records caretaker under the city or town clerk, or often relegated to the local historical society or public library. We have also centralized our historical records. That is not always the case, and researchers sometimes have to go from department to department to use the different types of records. But you can still use this as an example because our records document the same functions that most local governments perform. What types of records will a municipal archives have? Think of terms of where you intersect with the local government now. What activities do cities and towns perform for their citizens? And then what type of record would capture that information? Citizens pay taxes and vote, resulting in some form of tax and voter rolls. Business owners have to apply for business licenses and then pay business taxes. When you want to build a house, you have to get a building permit and then get it inspected. Cities are going to keep records on their elected officials and employees as well. Most of our researchers come in with a focus on a specific family or person and use records identified as traditional genealogical sources. We also have citizens and neighborhood groups that want to learn more about their specific neighborhood, so we zero in on records that provide geographical information and information about the delivery of city services to those areas. Or they may want to focus on a specific community group, identified by some unifying factor like gender, race, or religion. Students in Georgia Southern University's Wexford Savannah Access Project have taken all these approaches to our records, researching the Kehoe family, a leading Irish family in Savannah, looking at specific neighborhoods known to have had a heavy Irish population, as well as analyzing specific records for Irish nativity and specifically Wexford origins. We have created a series of research guides and checklists to assist our researchers and navigate our collection finding aids and inventories. And here you can see the path on our website, savannahga.gov/municipal archives. If you go there and click on using the archives, it will take you to our research guides. And we have a variety of research guides, including for doing genealogy, building research, businesses, city employees, African American history, neighborhoods. And here is a snapshot of two of those guides, the genealogy research checklist and the resources for researching businesses. While these guides are specific for our collections, they may also prove useful to those who want to see the different types of records available at the local level. For the city records, they direct you to the different record groups and specific collections to look at to help guide you through what might be overwhelming to some when they're starting out doing research. Kind of helps target you into our collections. Now I want to show you some examples of our records that specifically highlight Savannah's Irish population. In our city court collection, we have naturalization records, including alien declarations. On the left is the declaration of Patrick Kavanaugh, who embarked at Wexford and arrived in Savannah in January 1850. On the right are 4 declarations in a row, all from Irishmen in 1857. These records demonstrate how you can use some resources both for documenting an individual or family or for tracing a specific community group like Irish immigration to Savannah. As a government, a lot of our records pertain to taxation of citizens and the collecting of money. These snapshots show both taxation on real estate property, but also personal property. On the upper left shows Mrs. Anna Riley, who was taxed in 1861 on 1 horse, 1 carriage, and furniture that at the time was valued at $4,700. Using an inflation calendar, that is about $139,700 in today's money. Pulled out from the double spread page, you'll see Daniel O'Connor's entry from 1870. He was taxed on real estate property and 2 dogs, and Daniel's entry came from a page that listed several O'Connors. I think our voter registration books are an underutilized resource. They're rich with good information, including an individual's occupation, place of residence, which can be very useful when cross-referencing with other resources. Later years also include original signatures, which included marks or X's for those who cannot write their name, which is informative about an individual's education level. I chose these pages because the upper left one in the box shows Patrick Kavanaugh, for whom we just saw an alien declaration, and that is his voter registration from 1866, and it's listing him as a laborer and age 36, and he's living on, looks like Hall Street. And the right page includes several individuals from the Kehoe family with red stars. You'll note that Kavanaugh and 2 of the Kehoes all lived in Green Ward. Savannah's original town plan is built upon a system of wards and squares, and each ward in some way can be considered a neighborhood. Green and Washington wards are located along the eastern edge of downtown and were one of the areas that Irish population consolidated in the mid to late 1800s. Records like these help researchers track trends like this and population shifts over time, along with other sources like the city directories. And here locally, the Georgia Historical Society has a very large collection of the city directories. James Leonard was a sergeant with the Savannah Police Force at the time he applied for this 1874 building permit in Green Ward to enlarge a wooden dwelling. The improvement book entry on the right for 1875 shows that the improvements were completed and valued at $900. That's about $21,000 today. We often have researchers come in to research a family and encourage them to extend that research into building research, so they can learn more about their homes and neighborhoods, not just when somebody was born and died and got married, but where did they live? Conversely, those who come to us strictly to research a building are often encouraged by us to learn more about the individuals who built and utilized those buildings by seeking out records more commonly associated with genealogy, so they can get a more complete picture. Just like today, individuals in the past had to secure business licenses to the city in order to operate within the city's limits. Our city code, or local laws and ordinances, dictated allowable businesses and property uses. Records like this liquor bond and license for John McCann from the 1850s are an example of one such requirement. McCann was required to provide a bond of $200 in order to run a retail spirits store. We also have a series of business censuses taken in the early 20th century, which document business name, nature, and location. A quick review of the 1911 volume produced not only the Kehoe Iron Works, seen on the left, but the nearby Rourke's Iron Works, J.J. Rourke running a near beer establishment, and a Rossiter working as a wheelwright. I was particularly interested in tracking down records of the Rossiter family, as Frank Rossiter served as a city alderman in the 1970s and 1980s. And upon his death in 1983, the flag over Savannah City Hall was flown at half-staff. One interesting avenue could be to track the first Rossiter to Savannah and see the path of the family to such a prominent leadership position in our community. In addition to tracking businesses just generally operating in Savannah, municipal records document government doing business with local firms, like these documents from a contract between the city and Kehoe Iron Works related to the city's waterworks pump house. By looking at records like these, we can see how the Irish business community supported the larger improvements in infrastructure in Savannah. Like most organizations, local governments create personnel files for their employees. A review of the earliest personnel books available quickly provided an example of a native of Ireland, Patrick Ivers, appointed to the police force in 1890. His service record is interesting from a U.S. history perspective because he was found guilty by the mayor in 1917 of disobeying the chief of police for not executing a search warrant on an establishment owned by Abe Raskin in violation of the alcohol prohibition law. I wondered about this, and a quick review of local ordinances published in our city code books found that the city was enforcing the Georgia State Prohibition Act of 1907. Georgia was the first southern state to go dry. By 1915, 8 other southern states had followed suit, well before federal prohibition went into effect in 1920. I also wondered about Abe Raskin business, and by looking at the 1917 city directory, I found out that Abe Raskin was a grocer operating at 419 Jefferson Street here in Savannah. So this was a great example of one record leading me to 2 other primary records, one a city record, the city code, one not, the city directory, as well as a secondary resource on Georgia prohibition laws that started to tell a fuller story about Patrick Ivers. And I'm sure there's a lot more to learn about him and maybe why he disobeyed orders. Until 1919, the city health officer tracked births, marriages, and deaths within the city's limits. The 1849 death register includes many native Irish deaths during the month of September from a variety of causes. In this month alone, 15 of the 50 deaths are for individuals native of Ireland. The only group with a larger death rate were those actually native of Savannah in Georgia, numbering 17. The balance of the individuals are from 6 other countries combined. However, by the register at the bottom from the late 1890s, those listed as natives of Ireland are rarer to find, indicating Savannah's Irish community was becoming farther removed from the home country as other immigration waves came in from other areas of the world. The death registers can also be used to study disease and what populations or neighborhoods may have been more susceptible. Of the 15 Irish that died in September 1849, 8 died of some sort of fever, including scarlet, congestive, and bilious fevers. Like the death registers, burial or interment books can be used to track specific individuals or to conduct research on the Irish community in general. They both include name, date of death, age, disease, nativity, and residence. All important information that can be used to cross-reference to records in other institutions and other types of city records. There are several stories that are unique to Savannah's Irish community that can be documented in the records of the city's archives. One of the most important is the impact of the yellow fever epidemic on the fledgling Irish community. In his history of city government, Secretary to the Mayor Thomas Gamble reviewed the 1820 epidemic, stating, quote, "Chief among the sufferers were the Irish immigrants who had arrived in the early winter of 1819 in a destitute condition and settled in Washington Ward. Council then appropriated money for their temporary relief. Owing to their poverty and unacclimated state, the mortality among them was heavy." End quote. These council actions can be further researched and confirmed through city council minutes and cash books, as well as through contemporary newspapers held at the public library. Savannah's Irish community didn't fare much better in the 1854 yellow fever epidemic. In this page from the Board of Health September 1854 meeting minutes, excuse me. In this page from the 1854 meeting minutes, victim after victim is listed as a native of Ireland. Savannah's next major epidemic hit in 1876, and by this time the Irish community was either more settled into the southern climate or the victims of Irish ancestry were now listed as natives of Savannah. Out of the 896 victims of 1876 epidemic, only 142 were listed as natives of Ireland. That's 16% of the victims, compared to 40% of September 1854's victims. The city had a strong Irish presence on the city police and fire departments. The Savannah Police Department was organized in 1870. This 1871 annual report included a full roster of the force demonstrating this. Out of 100 privates, 57 of them identified as Irishmen, and 4 out of 6 of the sergeants had Irish surnames. An interesting avenue of research would be to compare this list to the 1871 city directories and plot where these Irishmen were living to see if they were clustered in the traditionally Irish neighborhoods or if they were scattered evenly across the city to help protect it. Like the police, the fire department had an Irish contingent, though the origin of the department was slightly different. Before the paid department was organized, the city was protected with the assistance of volunteer fire companies, which reflected their neighborhoods and therefore ethnic heritage. For instance, the Germania Fire Company. The Washington Fire Company protected the Irish neighborhood centered around Washington and Green wards, also known as the Old Fort neighborhood because of the former Fort Wayne nearby. The city ordinance on the left dictated the method that the volunteer fire companies were to elect their officers. In 1867, the Washington Fire Company petitioned the mayor and aldermen to organize the Washington Hose Company and to borrow the city hose at Firemen's Hall. Their petition was favorably met and the hose company activated. Almost all the officers signing the petition had Irish surnames, which you see starred here, including Daly, Connor, Sullivan, and McGrath. In 1875, the city organized a paid department, bringing together the various volunteer companies, including Washington. The city built a new 2-story brick station for the company nearby, seen in this photograph. The 1900 annual report included a station roster, still indicating a heavy Irish influence in the surnames of McGuire, McFarland, McCarthy, Cleary, and Murphy. In 2007, over 40 years after this brick station house was demolished, and more than 130 years after the Washington Fire Company left Washington Square, the community erected this monument in Washington Square to honor the Washington Fire Company, featuring the cornerstone of the 1875 station. One of the best collections in government archives is usually the maps, surveys, and plats created by the city engineers and surveyors. They are valuable resources to document community development as well as place specific properties in context. The city's engineering collection includes over 4,000 items, documenting Savannah since the 18th century. These maps show the northeastern section of the city, including the Old Fort neighborhood, with Washington and Green wards. Over the span of time from 1820 to 1940, those interested in tracing other Irish neighborhoods could combine data from the city directories and the federal censuses with these maps to document other Irish clusters around Savannah. I hope this brief review of some of the resources available in our municipal archives here in Savannah demonstrates for you the power of not only primary archival resources for telling the stories of Irish communities, but the unique opportunities offered through the use of public records of local governments, particularly when combined with the resources of religious collections, community historical collections, as well as private collections to tell a more complete story. While not all local governments may have the exact same records we do, or set up exactly the same, most local governments perform the same core functions and support services, which have not changed much over time. And by weaving local government records into a community's research and narrative, the history and story one tells becomes more complete, meaningful, and powerful, much like that of the Irish here in Savannah, Georgia. Thank you.